They told me the past should stay buried, but what would you do if your father dug it up himself with forged documents and affair, and a secret that burned our whole family name to ash? I didn't confront him in rage. I built a case instead, and when the truth hit the headlines, he lost everything he tried to steal from me. This isn't just my story, it's the reckoning he never saw coming. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. I left the office earlier than usual that Thursday. September in Washington always carried that crisp kind of light, the kind that made the city look clean, like rain had just rinsed everything away. I told my assistant I had to check the plumbing at the lake house before the next storm rolled in. She smiled politely, the way people do when they assume you're going away for peace and quiet. I didn't correct her. The drive from Seattle to Lakeview took just under 2 hours, long enough for my mind to settle into that gray hum between exhaustion and solitude. Highway 2 was nearly empty. Pines lined both sides of the road, their needles catching mist from the nearby foothills. I cracked the window open, and the scent of wet bark and earth drifted in. For a moment, it almost felt good to breathe. The lake appeared before me suddenly, flat as glass, too still to be real. I slowed down when I turned onto the gravel road that led to the cabin, my tires crunching against small stones. The place had always been my refuge, built by my grandparents in the 1960s, and passed down to me after they were gone. Modern renovations had turned it into something bright and livable, but the bones of the house were still old, full of whispers and memories. As I pulled into the driveway, my headlights swept over something unexpected, a navy blue Lexus parked crookedly near the porch. I frowned. I hadn't called anyone. No plumbers, no electricians. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe a mix-up. I cut the engine, listening. The air was heavy and still. Not a single bird. When I stepped out, a heron startled from the shoreline and took off with a sharp cry, wings flapping through the reflection of the dying sun. I stood there for a beat too long, the chill settling in my stomach. Something about that car didn't sit right. My father drove a Lexus once, but his was silver, not blue. And besides, he hadn't been up here in years. I slung my bag over my shoulder, walked up the porch steps, and turned the key in the lock. The door opened with that familiar creak, but the air that met me wasn't the usual scent of cedar and dust. It smelled like sandalwood and wine. I froze. There was a melody floating from upstairs, soft jazz playing low from a speaker I didn't remember leaving on. I shut the door quietly behind me. The hardwood floor was cool under my boots. I dropped my keys on the counter and scanned the living room. 2 wine glasses sat on the coffee table. One had lipstick smeared along the rim. A bottle of red, half-empty, rested beside them. "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I expected. No answer. I moved farther in my fingers, brushing the edge of the sofa, the throw blanket draped over it. Then I saw it. Damp footprints leading away from the rug, faint but visible, curving toward the stairs. Bare feet. 2 sets. Every sound in the house magnified the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, the steady rhythm of my pulse in my ears. The air felt wrong, too warm, too lived in. You know that moment when silence becomes heavy, like the house itself is holding its breath. That's what I walked into. I started up the stairs slowly, each step groaning under my weight. The footprints grew clearer near the landing. The hallway light was on, though I always turned it off before leaving. At the end of the hall, the master bedroom door stood open just a crack. Beyond it, the faint rush of water. My water heater shouldn't even be running. "Hello?" I tried again, my voice sharper now. Still nothing. The smell of lavender bath oil reached me thick and sweet. It wrapped around me like smoke, familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. My hands began to shake, though the air wasn't cold. I reached the bedroom threshold. The room was dim, the blinds half drawn. A man's jacket was tossed carelessly over the chair by the window, and beside it a silk scarf, feminine, red, the kind my mother never wore. My heart pounded against my ribs. I wanted to turn around to leave and never know, but my feet wouldn't listen. They moved on their own, crossing the carpet toward the open bathroom door. Steam rolled out, curling into the bedroom air. The sound of running water was steady, rhythmic, unhurried. I could hear voices now. Muffled laughter, a deep tone I knew too well, and a woman's breathless giggle. No, it couldn't be. My throat tightened. My father hadn't stayed here since my grandmother's funeral. And Claire. Claire Sutton, the neighbor who used to bring casseroles when my mother broke her wrist last winter. She'd been at our family barbecues, smiling harmless. I inched closer, the tile cool beneath my boots. My hand hovered over the doorknob. My reflection shimmered faintly in the mirror across the hall, fractured by steam. I could walk away, I thought. Pretend I saw nothing. Pretend this was someone else's house, someone else's life. But the thought of leaving them to their lie burned through me like acid. My fingers closed around the handle. I wasn't supposed to be here. But maybe fate wanted witnesses that day. The metal felt slick under my palm. I took one slow breath and turned it. The sound of the latch echoed louder than thunder. Then everything, water, laughter, air, stopped. And just like that, the world I thought I knew began to shift. The steam hit my face first, warm, wet, suffocating. I couldn't see anything at first, only shapes and colors dissolving into fog. Then came the laughter. A man's deep rumbling chuckle and a woman's light, breathy reply. The sound didn't belong here. It didn't belong in my house. I pushed the door open wider, and the haze parted like a curtain. There they were, my father. Richard Warren. 61 years old, half submerged in the white porcelain bathtub, his arms draped lazily along the edges like he owned the moment, and between his legs, Claire Sutton. 42, our neighbor, her hair slicked back her shoulders, bare, fingers tracing circles across his chest. For a second, my mind refused to understand what my eyes saw. The steam made everything too soft, too dreamlike. It should have been someone else's voice, someone else's father, someone else's nightmare. Claire turned her head, her laughter still half alive when she saw me. The sound died in her throat. "Oh my God," she whispered. Her eyes went wide. Richard froze. His expression, somewhere between shock and guilt, twisted into panic. "Emily, wait. This isn't what it looks like. I didn't move." My reflection stared back from the fogged mirror behind them. Wide eyes, pale face, a ghost standing in the doorway. The smell of lavender oil and wine filled the air. My heart didn't race. It just stopped. Claire scrambled her arm, shooting out to grab a towel. "We were just..." "Don't," I said quietly. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was too calm, too steady. "Don't say another word." Richard's mouth opened again, desperate fumbling for logic. "Honey, listen, please." I stepped inside. The steam clung to my skin and the air turned heavy between us. Without saying a word, I reached behind me, shut the door, and turned the lock. The metallic click rang through the room, sharp and final. The sound snapped something in him. "Emily," he barked, standing abruptly, water sloshing over the edge of the tub. "You can't just... Stay where you are," I said. My voice cut through the steam like a blade. "Don't move." Claire started to cry, her breath hiccuping as she clutched the towel to her chest. "Please let us explain," she said through tears. "Explain." I almost laughed, but it came out as air. I don't think there's a word in the English language that fixes this. I backed away slowly, my fingers brushing the doorknob again, making sure the lock was firm. My father's voice followed me, angry now, defensive. "Emily, open this door right now. You're being ridiculous. Ridiculous." The word hung in the air like smoke. That was what he'd chosen. Not sorry, not ashamed, ridiculous. I turned, walked down the hallway, and every step I took echoed through the house. The music had stopped somewhere in the chaos upstairs. The only sounds now were water dripping from the tub, and their muffled voices calling my name. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I only did what felt right. I contained the damage. Downstairs, the air felt colder. I grabbed a dish towel from the counter and dried my hands even though they weren't wet. My phone sat there, screen glowing faintly from an unread text. I ignored it, unlocked the screen, and scrolled to one name. "Mom." It rang twice before she answered, her voice groggy. "Emily." "It's late. Is something wrong?" I swallowed. My throat burned from holding everything in. "Mom." I said steady but quiet. "You need to come to Lakeview. Right now." There was a pause. "Why? What happened? Are you okay?" I stared at the ceiling, at the faint vibration of footsteps above me. "You deserve to see this yourself." "Emily, what are you talking about?" "Just come," I said, and ended the call. I placed the phone face down on the counter, the sound of my heartbeat louder than the ticking clock. Upstairs, my father pounded on the locked door again. "Emily, you're overreacting." This isn't what it seems. From behind him, Claire's voice cracked. She's going to tell everyone. Richard, please, shut up, he hissed too low for her to hear. But I heard it. I heard everything. I sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, palms still trembling. The smell of sandalwood lingered in the air. The wine glasses were still there, one with lipstick, one without. I stared at them until the red liquid looked like blood under the soft kitchen light. Minutes stretched into hours. I didn't move. Didn't even blink. My mind drifted between memories that no longer belonged to me. The father who once taught me how to fix a leaky faucet. The neighbor who used to wave across the fence. The family dinners that now felt staged. People talk about heartbreak like it's loud, like it explodes, but betrayal doesn't shout. It whispers. It hides in the quiet, in the spaces between words, in the click of a lock, in the silence that follows. I looked up toward the ceiling. The voices upstairs had gone quiet. Maybe they were whispering now. Maybe they were waiting. The clock struck 11. The lake outside was still. The world for a moment felt painfully, perfectly quiet. And I sat there waiting for my mother to arrive, knowing that by the time she did nothing in this house, or in our family, would ever sound the same again. The hours dragged on in heavy silence. My mother didn't call back. The sun sank behind the trees, turning the lake outside into a sheet of molten orange. I sat at the kitchen table until the shadows grew long enough to touch my feet. Upstairs, the house had gone quiet, except for the occasional drip of water from the faucet I hadn't turned off. I stood and started moving without thinking. Maybe it was instinct, maybe survival. My hands needed something to do. I began collecting the evidence of what they'd left behind. Their carelessness, their comfort. 2 robes tossed across the sofa, still damp at the collars. A half-eaten box of chocolates on the counter. A wine cork on the floor near the rug. On the coffee table, a single gold bracelet glimmered under the lamp. Claire's. She'd worn it to dinner at our house last Thanksgiving. I remember my mother complimenting it. Lovely piece, Claire, it catches the light. I slipped it into a small Ziploc bag from the drawer, my pulse steady, now detached. I wasn't angry anymore. Just awake. I pulled out my phone, took photos of everything. The glasses, the towels, the footprints still faint on the hardwood. My thumb trembled slightly, but not from fear. It was precision. Documentation. Proof that what I saw wasn't just a fever dream born from exhaustion. Then I remembered the small study near the stairs. My father had always called it his thinking space, though I'd used it for storage since inheriting the house. I flipped on the light. Dust floated in the air, soft and lazy. The desk drawers were partly open. I tugged one out and found a neat stack of envelopes, some unopened, some torn, all addressed to me. I sat down, tore one open. A bank statement. Another envelope. Mortgage insurance renewal. Then a thicker one. Loan confirmation. My name in bold type. My signature at the bottom. Except it wasn't mine. The signature was mine, but I never signed anything. My chest tightened as I flipped through the rest. 6 pages, all identical, all with the same imitation of my handwriting. The numbers leapt off the page. $200,000. The property listed as collateral, the Lakeview house. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. My father hadn't just used this place for his affair. He'd used it for leverage, for money. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. I pulled out my phone again and scrolled to the only person I could trust with this. Alan Foster. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice calm and groggy. Emily. You do realize it's close to midnight, Alan. I need you to verify something for me. Fast. What's wrong? Someone forged my signature. On loan documents. Who? I hesitated. The word came out flat. My father. There was a pause. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. Low, controlled all business. Don't confront him. Not tonight. Do you have the papers? Yes. Scan them. Send them to me. I'll check with the county records in the morning. Alan. I said, my voice catching for the first time he used my name. Emily, listen to me. You don't have to handle this alone. I'm not handling it. I said, forcing my breath to even out. I'm documenting it. He sighed. Just be careful. Fraud or not, this is still your family, not tonight, I murmured and hung up. I stood, gathered the papers into a folder, and set them on the counter. My reflection in the window stared back at me, pale, hollow-eyed calm. Behind it, the lake glowed faintly under the moonlight. Then came a knock at the front door. 3 soft taps. I froze, heartbeat picking up. Another knock, louder this time. When I opened it, Sam Turner stood there, broad-shouldered, still wearing his work jacket, his expression somewhere between concern and confusion. You okay? I heard shouting earlier. I forced a small smile. I'm fine, Sam. His eyes flicked toward the stairs behind me. Sounded like a fight. You sure you don't need me to call someone? I need you to remember tonight, I said quietly. If anyone asks you were here, you saw me calm. You saw me alone. He frowned. Emily, what's going on? Just promise me, he hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck, then nodded slowly. All right, I promise. From upstairs came a sharp thud, then voices. A woman's high and panicked. You said she never comes here during the week. Then my father's voice, furious and hoarse. You insisted today was safe. Sam looked up toward the noise, startled. Is that? It's handled, I said, my tone cutting through his question. Go home, Sam, please. He nodded again uneasily, stepping backward off the porch. If you need anything, I won't, I said and shut the door. The lock slid into place with a soft click. I stood there, forehead resting against the doorframe, eyes closed. Their voices upstairs rose again, muffled, heated, full of accusation and panic. It wasn't the sound of lovers. It was the sound of 2 people realizing they'd been caught in their own lie. I leaned against the wall, letting the tension drain out of me slowly. My father's words, "You insisted today was safe," echoed through the empty house. That's when I knew. This wasn't an accident. It was a routine. I turned off the lights, the house falling into darkness, except for the pale wash of the moon through the curtains. The lake outside shimmered quiet and cruel, pretending to be peaceful. Upstairs, the voices kept arguing, each one blaming the other, as if the truth could be undone by noise. I sat down on the couch, the papers heavy in my lap, and listened. The night stretched long and silent except for the 2 people above me destroying each other, and somewhere between their shouting and the soft hum of the lake, I decided I wasn't the one who'd be breaking anymore. Headlights sliced through the blinds, washing the walls in white stripes. I checked the time. The rumble of an engine faded outside, followed by the crunch of gravel. My mother's car door shut. I opened the front door before she could knock. Margaret Warren stood there, beige cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders, her face a mixture of worry and irritation. She looked like she'd come straight from bed. Her hair was slightly tousled, and her eyes searched my face for something familiar. "What's going on, sweetheart?" she asked, breath fogging in the night air. "You'll see," I said quietly. She frowned. "Emily, you're scaring me." "Good," I replied, stepping aside. "Maybe then you'll understand." She hesitated before stepping in, glancing around the dim living room. The house smelled of lavender and wine, like the aftermath of something already dead. "Who's here?" she asked. "Follow me." The sound of running water still drifted down from upstairs, steady, deliberate, as if someone had forgotten to turn off the faucet of their own guilt. The faint murmur of voices trailed behind it, hushed and frantic. As we climbed the stairs, my mother's breathing grew shallow. Her hand brushed the railing. She knew something was wrong, but not how wrong. The bathroom door stood closed, steam curling from the gap beneath it. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Emily, what is this?" I didn't answer. I reached forward, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. The steam rolled into the hallway, thick and ghostly. Inside the mirror was fogged, the air heavy with lavender and sweat. My father stood frozen by the bathtub, a towel slung low around his waist. Claire Sutton crouched beside him. Her hair, dripping her towel, clutched tightly to her chest. For a moment, no one moved. The scene felt staged, almost cinematic, if not for the terror in their faces. Richard's voice cracked first. "Maggie, wait. It's not what—" My mother raised her hand sharply. "Don't. Just don't." Her voice was quiet, but it carried more force than any shout. Claire started crying. "I'm so sorry, Margaret, please." Margaret turned her gaze toward her eyes narrowing. "You sit at my table. You hug my daughter. You smile at me across fences. And this is what you were doing. Claire's lip trembled. It wasn't supposed to. It never is. My mother cut her off. Richard stepped forward, dripping water, reaching out a hand. Please, Maggie. I made a mistake. She took a step back. You made a choice. I stood by the doorway, the steam wrapping around me like fog. You said you wanted the truth, Mom. I said quietly, Here it is. Margaret looked at me, her expression unreadable. Her eyes were wet, but not from tears. She nodded once, as if confirming a thought she'd been avoiding for years. Then she turned away. She walked past me down the stairs. Her footsteps echoed against the wood, steady and certain. I followed her down, though I already knew what she was about to do. In the kitchen, she paused. The old wooden table, the one my grandparents had built decades ago, gleamed under the low light. She slipped off her wedding ring and placed it there. The sound of metal against wood was soft but final. Richard's voice came from upstairs, desperate and raw. Please, just listen to me. Margaret's voice was calm, almost gentle. I have, for years. He appeared at the top of the stairs, towel clinging to him, face red and wet. You can't just walk away. I stepped forward, placing myself between them. She can, and she will. Emily, stay out of this, he snapped. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice sharp as glass. You used her love and my house to bury your lies. You've run out of rooms to hide in. Margaret's keys jingled softly in her hand. I think I'm done, she said, almost to herself. Richard gripped the railing, his knuckles white. Maggie, please, it didn't mean anything. You and I, we can fix this. We can... She turned back to him, her eyes hollow. I don't fix what's already dead. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floor beneath her feet. Claire's muffled sobs drifted down the stairs. My mother walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped into the night. Cold air swept in behind her. Richard started down after her, frantic. Maggie, don't do this. Please, I blocked his path. She did listen. Dad, now she's leaving. He stared at me, eyes wild as if I'd betrayed him instead. You're my daughter, he said through clenched teeth. Not tonight, I said. Margaret's car engine started outside. The headlights cut through the windows, washing over the living room one last time before disappearing down the drive. The sound faded, leaving behind nothing but stillness. Richard stood, frozen towel slipping, water pooling around his feet. Then he collapsed onto his knees. His reflection wavered in the wet tile floor, a broken image of a man who'd once been the center of our family. He whispered something I couldn't make out, maybe her name, maybe mine. I didn't care. The house felt heavier now, the kind of silence that comes after a scream. Sometimes the loudest goodbye is silence closing a door. The morning after felt foreign, like I'd woken up inside someone else's life. The fog hung over Lakeview, thick and white, swallowing the edges of the dock and the water beyond. Cold light filtered through the windows of the cafe where I sat waiting. My coffee had gone cold by the time Alan Foster walked in. He looked the same as always. Neat suit, navy tie, the kind of man who organized his thoughts before he spoke. When he spotted me, his eyes softened, but his movements stayed businesslike. He set his briefcase on the table, took off his glasses, and sighed. You look like you haven't slept, he said. I didn't. He sat across from me and opened the folder I'd emailed him the night before. His eyes skimmed the first few pages, then stopped. He looked up. Emily, this is bad, I figured. The signature's forged. Clean, but still forged. Your father committed fraud. I watched him say the words. Fraud. Not mistake. Not misunderstanding. A crime. I stirred my coffee once, though it didn't need it. He used my name. My home. I guess family doesn't mean ownership anymore. Alan kept flipping through the papers. The rustle sounded like the echo of waves. And this, he said, stopping at the second-to-last page. There's a transfer here. Half the loan amount went into something called Sutton Creative Photography Fund. Claire Sutton's name. My throat tightened. They were partners. He nodded slowly. Looks that way. I laughed quietly, a small bitter sound. Of course they were. She wasn't just in his bed. She was in his books. Alan leaned back, studying me. You need to file an injunction immediately. I'll start the paperwork today. That'll freeze the house and block any future transfers. Do it, I said. He typed a note into his laptop. The keys clicked in rhythmic bursts, steady and final. Outside, the fog shifted, curling around the lake like smoke. The sound of a boat motor in the distance broke the silence for a moment, then vanished again. Alan looked up. You okay? I thought about the question. Okay wasn't the word. I felt hollow, like my skin didn't quite fit anymore. I'm functional, I said. He closed the folder. What he did, it's personal, but it's also business. You need to keep it that way now. I nodded. That's the plan. He hesitated, then added, Do you want revenge? The word hung in the air. I looked out at the lake. The same water that used to feel endless now looked like glass ready to break. No, I said finally. I want clarity. Alan watched me carefully, then nodded. Then let's start with the truth. He slid a stack of forms across the table. These will protect you. Legal ownership banking holds injunction notice. Sign here, and initial at the bottom. I pulled the pen from his hand. Steady. Now no tremor. My name flowed across the page. I paused for a second, staring at the ink, thinking about the last time my name appeared on paper without my consent. The first time he used my name, it was a lie. This time, it was justice. Alan gathered the papers and slid them into his case. I'll file this with the county clerk as soon as I get back to Seattle. You'll get confirmation within 48 hours. I nodded again. My eyes drifting past him toward the water outside. The lake was eerily calm, a mirror of the sky. Somewhere in that reflection, I saw another version of myself, small, still, and waiting. My mind pulled me backward years ago to that same water. I must have been 8 or 9. My father had taken me out swimming early one summer morning. The water was freezing, and I'd panicked halfway to the dock. I remember him laughing, steadying me by the shoulders. Trust the water, he'd said. It'll hold you up if you stop fighting it. I used to believe him. Now I knew better. The only thing that holds you up in the end is yourself. Emily Allen's voice broke through the memory. You need me to drive you home. No, I'm fine. He studied me a moment longer, then stood. You're tougher than you think you know. I managed a small smile. So I've been told. He squeezed my shoulder once before leaving the bell above the door chiming softly as he stepped out into the fog. When he was gone, I stayed seated. The cafe was nearly empty, only the sound of a waitress stacking dishes and the distant lap of waves against the pier. I turned my phone face up. A dozen missed calls from Dad, none from Mom. Outside, a pair of ducks floated near the shore, gliding together across the surface unaware of the storm beneath. I walked to the edge of the dock. The boards creaked under my boots. My reflection looked back at me, faint and uncertain, rippled by the smallest breeze. The water was cold when I reached down and touched it, but it didn't bite. It reminded me that I was still here, still real. It wasn't just betrayal. It was planning. Strategy. A lifetime of deceit under the roof. I thought was safe. The fog thickened again, swallowing the lake, the dock, the world. Somewhere behind me a church bell chimed noon. I turned away from the water, straightened my coat, and walked back toward my car. The papers Alan had given me were tucked safely inside my bag, their weight steady against my side. By the time I reached the end of the gravel path, I didn't feel hollow anymore. Just sharp, defined, and ready to begin again. 2 days later, the town of Lakeview was humming like a beehive split open. Everyone had something to say, and most of them said it loudly. The morning sunlight hit my phone screen as I scrolled through the news, an article by Helen Carter, our local reporter. The headline read, Respected Professor Caught in Scandal at Daughter's Home. My father's name was there, in bold print, followed by words that burned a fare. Betrayal fraud. My name sat lower in the paragraph, almost hidden, but still there. The comment section was a feeding frenzy. Some defended him. Everyone makes mistakes, but most didn't. Disgusting. How could a man do that to his own family? One even said, that poor daughter. She'll never live it down. I stopped reading. People love other people's disasters. It makes their own look smaller. I closed the article and tossed the phone onto the counter. The quiet of the lake outside was a lie now. Nothing about this place was calm anymore. The phone buzzed again. Texts, notifications, fragments of sympathy from co-workers and friends I hadn't spoken to in months. I didn't answer any of them. By noon, the Homeowners Association had already called an emergency meeting. Linda Reynolds, the head of the board, gathered everyone at the community center. We can't have this in our neighborhood's image, she said. According to Sam, who texted me updates from the back row, we represent Lakeview's integrity. A public scandal of this magnitude affects us all. Integrity. The word made me laugh out loud. While Linda was defending the town's reputation, my father was across Main Street storming into the Lakeview Chronicle office. He looked like a man unraveling. Shirt, wrinkled tie, missing eyes wild. Helen Carter stood calmly behind her desk as he slammed the newspaper onto the counter. "You print lies," he shouted. "You retract this, or I'll sue you, and this whole town." Helen didn't flinch. "Your daughter confirmed the documents," she said evenly. "The photos speak for themselves. Professor Warren. Someone filmed the entire thing on their phone. Within hours, the video hit social media. The caption read, 'Fallen Father of Lakeview.' It spread like wildfire across local Facebook groups through the town forum, even on the Seattle newsfeed. By that evening, I watched the clip sitting on my couch, the volume low. My father stood in the frame, red-faced, yelling as people around him filmed his reputation disintegrating in real time. I didn't feel vindicated, just tired. "He's still trying to control the narrative," I whispered. "Even when it's over, he wants to write the ending himself." The knock on my front door came just as the sun began to sink behind the lake. 3 sharp taps. I didn't have to guess who it was. When I opened the door, Claire stood there. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back, her makeup smudged. She looked small, almost fragile, wearing a coat too thin for the cold. "Please," she said before I could speak. "Make them stop." Helen's article. "People are sharing it everywhere. My gallery canceled the show I've been planning for months. I'm losing clients. I'm losing everything." I leaned against the doorframe. "You used my house, my name, my family. Fixing your reputation isn't my job." She stepped closer, voice cracking. "You don't understand. I loved him." I stared at her, searching her face for the woman who used to wave at me across the fence. "You loved him." The words felt foreign. "Then you can fall with him." Her tears came harder now. "He told me he was lonely, that your mother didn't understand him anymore. Lonely people go for walks, Claire. They don't commit fraud and destroy their families." She shook her head, trying to catch her breath. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. It never is." The silence between us stretched thin. From somewhere across the lake, a dog barked, the sound echoing through the trees. Claire's lip trembled as she whispered, "I just wanted to be seen. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then you picked the wrong audience," I said quietly. Her face hardened, the sadness giving way to anger. "You think you're better than us?" "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "Just not like you." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Then she turned, storming down the porch steps, her heels crunching against the gravel. "You'll regret this," she shouted over her shoulder. "Already did," I said under my breath. I shut the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The sound of her car engine faded down the road. The house was silent again except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the wooden floors under my bare feet. I walked to the window and looked out at the lake. The last light of day turned the surface silver, rippling softly in the wind. For a moment, I saw my reflection in it, tired, calm, unbroken. Karma doesn't need my help. It's always on time. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of untouched tea, the glow of my phone lighting the dark. Notifications kept coming, one after another. Friends asking if it was true, reporters requesting comment, strangers sending sympathy or spite. I turned it face down. The world could have its story. I already knew mine. Upstairs, the guest room smelled faintly of the lavender bath oil I'd poured down the drain earlier. The scent clung to the air like a ghost that refused to leave. I opened the windows, letting the cold night air sweep through. Outside, the town, lights glittered along the opposite shore. Each one a window, each one holding a person, pretending they weren't glad it wasn't their life unraveling this week. People always pretend they want the truth, but what they really want is distance from it. I sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the lake. Somewhere out there, my father and Claire were trying to survive the story they'd written. I didn't have to do anything. The world was already finishing what they started. Seattle smelled like rain and car exhaust that day, the kind of city scent that clings to everything. I parked near the boutique hotel just off Roosevelt Avenue and sat for a minute before going in, watching the traffic lights blink red against the drizzle. I hadn't seen my mother since that night. She hadn't answered any of my calls or texts. I wasn't sure what kind of version of her I was walking toward. The fragile one who'd driven away in silence, or the one who used to tell me storms pass if you wait long enough. The lobby was small, all beige and chrome, the faint scent of detergent hanging in the air. I signed in at the front desk and took the elevator up to the 3rd floor, holding a bouquet of yellow lilies close to my chest. They were her favorite, or at least they used to be. When I reached her door, I hesitated before knocking. The sound echoed down the hallway hollow and uncertain. After a pause, the door opened halfway. Margaret stood there in jeans and a loose sweater, her hair tied back, her expression unreadable. "You didn't have to come," she said flatly. "I did." I answered. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "You left without a word." She stepped back, opening the door fully. "Come in, then." The room smelled faintly of tea and the sharp lemon scent of cleaning spray. It was spotless. Bed-made tight curtains drawn halfway, suitcase open but tidy. A hotel room, trying too hard to feel like somewhere safe. I handed her the flowers. She looked at them for a second, then placed them in a water glass on the nightstand. "You drove all the way from Lakeview." "Yeah. Must have been a long drive." "It was worth it," I said, taking a seat in the armchair by the window. She poured herself tea from the electric kettle, her movements careful and deliberate. "You've humiliated him, you know." I blinked. "Excuse me, your father can't even show his face on campus. Do you have any idea what that does to a man like him?" The words hit like a slap. "He did that to himself, Mom." Her voice sharpened, trembling at the edges. "You didn't have to expose him publicly." "I didn't expose him," I said, forcing my tone to stay even. "I didn't call the press. I didn't leak anything. The truth did that all on its own." She set the teacup down harder than necessary. "You could have stopped it. You could have protected us." "Protected us," I repeated. "From what? Reality?" "From him stealing my name, using my house, sleeping with our neighbor." She flinched, her shoulders stiffening. "You don't understand what it's like to live with someone for 30 years. You build things, habits, a rhythm, a life. And then one day, it's just gone. You can't comprehend that kind of loss." I swallowed hard, trying not to let the anger turn into something uglier. "You didn't lose it, Mom. He did." Silence stretched between us. The sound of rain tapped softly against the window. Finally, she spoke again, her voice breaking in places she didn't expect. "I suspected for months," she said quietly. "I saw how he looked at her, the little things, lingering too long at the mailbox, the late drives home. I just didn't want to believe it, didn't want to lose the life we built." The truth settled in like a weight. My mother, always the one who noticed everything, had chosen blindness. "You didn't lose it," I said softly. "He threw it away." She turned to the open suitcase on the bed. A single framed photo rested against a folded sweater, her wedding picture. My father young and proud, his arm around her waist, her smile radiant and full of trust. She picked it up and studied it for a long moment. "Do you remember this day?" she asked. "I wasn't born yet," I said. She smiled faintly. "Right. Of course." Then slowly she ran her thumb along the frame's edge, and before I could stop her, she pulled the photo free, folded it once, and tore it cleanly in half. The sound of the paper ripping was soft, almost graceful. She dropped the pieces into the trash can beside the bed. "Then maybe it's time I stopped pretending," she said. I stared at the torn picture, half of his face staring up from the bin. "Mom." She sat down beside me, tea forgotten, her hands trembling in her lap. "Do you think it ever gets easier? The part where you realize the person you loved the most was only ever a stranger waiting for the right moment to leave?" I thought about my father's face, red with shame in that video, yelling at reporters. I thought about the bathtub, the lavender oil, the lies. "I don't think it gets easier," I said. "I think it just stops hurting as much." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "You always were stronger than me." "That's not true." She turned toward me, her lips pressed tight. "You think surviving is strength? Sometimes it's the only kind we get." The clock on the nightstand ticked softly. Outside, the rain had turned into a steady drizzle, blurring the city lights beyond the window. My mother stood and walked over to draw the curtains. She stood there for a moment, watching the cars pass below, then whispered, "Maybe I just wanted peace more than truth. You can't have one without the other," I said. Her hand froze on the curtain. For a second, she looked small, fragile in a way I'd never seen her before. Then she let go and turned back toward me. Something new settling in her eyes, resolve, maybe even relief. She reached for the tea again, her voice softer. "You know your father used to say, love is about holding on." I looked down at the torn photograph in the trash. Then maybe he never learned that sometimes it's about letting go. We didn't say anything for a long time after that. The room felt lighter, emptier, like the air after a storm. She called it closure. I called it survival. Sometimes they mean the same thing. Alan's call came just after sunrise. The lake outside was still half covered in mist, pale silver in the early light. I sat on the porch steps with my coffee, the phone pressed against my ear. His voice carried through the static calm, but clipped. The court approved the emergency injunction, he said. The property is officially frozen. The Lakeview house is now registered solely under your name. No one, not even your father, can access it, sell it, or use it as collateral. For the first time in weeks. I exhaled. Then he can't touch what's mine anymore. Alan's tone softened. It's a start. But Emily, this is going to get uglier before it gets cleaner. You're ready for that. I already lived through ugly, I said. We hung up, and I sat there for a moment watching the fog rise and dissolve into daylight. The house looked calmer now. Quiet, almost innocent again. But I knew better. Walls remember things, even when people pretend not to. By 9, a car door slammed outside. Through the window, I saw a man in a gray suit walking toward the porch. Detective Harris Cole. He introduced himself politely when I opened the door, flashing his badge like it was just another formality. Ms. Warren, thanks for meeting with me, he said. Mind if I come in? I nodded, stepping aside. He smelled faintly of aftershave and wet pavement. I just need to confirm a few details about the forged documents, he said, flipping open his notebook. You're the sole property owner, correct? Yes. And you believe your father was responsible for the falsified loan application. I met his eyes. I don't believe it. I know it. He nodded once, jotting something down. Forgery's a serious charge. Before we proceed, I need to ask, do you want to press charges formally? The question hung in the air longer than it should have. I looked around the living room, my home, my parents' shadows still clinging to the corners, my father's voice, my mother's silence, the echo of every lie that had lived here. Yes, I said quietly, but not for revenge, for record. Detective Cole studied me for a second as if weighing my words, then closed his notebook. Understood. We'll move forward. After he left, the house felt both lighter and heavier. Justice always carries both. By afternoon, I'd driven back to my office in Seattle, a converted warehouse with tall windows and too much quiet. I was reviewing client layouts when the front door opened without a knock. I didn't need to look up to know the voice. My stomach tightened. He stood in the doorway, older somehow. His once neat hair was unkempt, his face unshaven, his shirt wrinkled and untucked. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Please, he said, stepping closer. Let's talk. I stood, keeping the desk between us. We said everything that needed to be said. I made mistakes. He said, his voice trembling. God knows I did. But I'm still your father. I just wanted to fix things before it's too late. It already is. He swallowed hard, glancing around the room like he was looking for something to hold on to. I lost your mother. I can't lose you too. You didn't lose us, I said. You pushed us away. He winced like the words physically struck him. You don't understand, Em. I was trying to hold our lives together. The loan, it wasn't just for me. It was supposed to help you help this family. I shook my head. By forging my name, by dragging me into your lies. His eyes glistened. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. And Claire? I asked quietly. He hesitated. That was complicated. It was simple, I said. You chose her. Chose. He closed his eyes, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I thought I could fix it with love. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Love without respect is just manipulation. He looked up at me, then really looked, his eyes red and wet. You sound like your mother. That's the first compliment you've given me in years. Something in him broke then. He sank into the chair opposite my desk, his head in his hands. The sound that came from him wasn't the angry, booming voice of my childhood. It was smaller, cracked, like the sound of glass splintering under pressure. I never wanted this, he whispered. Any of it. Then maybe you shouldn't have built it, I said. He looked up, desperation flickering in his eyes. You're all I have left. No, I said, steady now. I was what you had. You don't get to say that anymore. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. He sat there for another minute, breathing unevenly. Then he stood, shoulders sagging. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. But one day you'll understand what it's like to live with regret. I met his gaze, unflinching. I already do. I just refuse to live in it. He nodded faintly. A broken man trying to hold on to dignity that no longer existed. Goodbye, Em. Goodbye, Dad. He turned and left the echo of the door closing following him out. I stayed standing long after he was gone, staring at the empty space he'd filled. He thought tears were redemption, but repentance without consequence is still deceit. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. People walking dogs, buses, passing a man laughing into his phone. The world doesn't pause for other people's sins. It just watches, and then it keeps going. And this time, I was ready to do the same. By the time the leaves started to fall in Lakeview, the whispers had become a roar. News spread in small towns the way fire spreads in dry grass. Quiet at first, then unstoppable. Everywhere I went, people looked twice, half with pity, half with curiosity. They didn't have to ask. They already knew. The homeowners board sent an official letter first printed on heavy paper with the Lakeview Association crest embossed at the top. Effective immediately, it read, Professor Richard Warren is removed from all board participation and community representation. Linda Reynolds' signature at the bottom looked like it had been written with satisfaction rather than duty. A few days later, Helen Carter published her second article in the Lakeview Chronicle. The headline was cruel in its precision. The man who lost his reflection. It was longer this time, detailed almost poetic in how it dismantled him. It quoted former colleagues, students, even neighbors who remembered odd behavior and inappropriate closeness. There was a single paragraph quoting Sam Turner. I was there the night it happened. I saw Emily. She was calm. That's how I knew it was real. Everyone wants a piece of someone's downfall, especially when the fall is spectacular. My father didn't respond publicly, but the university did. A notice went out the same day. Effective immediately, the Board of Regents rescinds Professor Richard Warren's emeritus title due to conduct unbecoming of faculty status. His email account was suspended, his name quietly removed from the university's website. I imagined his office door with the placard taken down, leaving behind a faint square of cleaner paint. Sam stopped by once to tell me the town couldn't stop talking. It's like people are feeding on it, he said, shaking his head. Every dinner table, every cafe, everyone's dissecting the same story. I nodded. They always do. Someone else's ruin makes them feel righteous. He gave me a small look of concern. You holding up, I'm surviving. After that, the phone calls started. Not to me. To him. My father's number kept flashing on my screen. I never answered, but the messages filled my voicemail apologies that sounded like performance excuses laced with self-pity. His voice grew weaker with each one. By the end, he wasn't angry anymore. Just small. Claire's life unraveled alongside his. The photography studio she rented on Main Street closed within a week. I heard from Helen that she'd tried to sell her camera equipment online, but couldn't find a buyer. Sponsors backed out of her planned exhibit, and her social media turned into a wasteland of deleted posts and silent comment sections. The town that once admired her creative eye now saw only scandal. Lakeview was unforgiving that way. It loved redemption stories, but it adored destruction more. One night near midnight, I was at home reading when I heard the first bang. It was sharp, desperate. 3 knocks that didn't wait for permission. My stomach sank before I even stood. The porch light revealed him soaked through from the rain hair plastered to his forehead. My father. Please, he said, his voice shaking. Let me in. The rainwater glistened on his coat. His eyes were bloodshot hollow. I have nowhere else, he whispered. I stayed where I was, one hand still on the doorframe. You made sure of that. He took a step forward, reaching out. Please, I didn't mean for any of this. Meaning doesn't undo doing, I said. The words hung between us, steady and cruelly true. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore, like the daughter who used to admire him had vanished. Maybe she had. Rain dripped from his sleeves, pooling at his feet. His breath came in ragged bursts. I just wanted to be loved again, he said quietly, his voice breaking mid-sentence. I almost opened the door then, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of his laughter echoing off those bathroom tiles, or the sight of my mother's face the night she tore her wedding photo in half. You wanted love, I said softly, but you traded it for validation. They're not the same. He pressed a hand against the door, his palm trembling. I don't know who I am anymore. That makes 2 of us, I replied. He slid down until he was sitting on the porch back against the door, rainwater soaking his clothes. His sobs came in small, broken gasps. I stood there for a long moment, listening to him cry, feeling every part of me twist in places I thought had already healed. Eventually, I turned away. Through the wood, his voice came again, quieter now, almost childlike. I thought I could fix it with time. Time, I thought, doesn't fix what truth destroys. The sound of his crying faded into the rhythm of the rain. When I finally looked out the window again, he was gone. The porch was empty except for the wet outline of where he'd been sitting. He mistook desire for love, and when both ran dry, all that was left was shame. I shut off the lights and went upstairs. The house felt colder than usual, but peaceful too, like it had exhaled something it had been holding for years. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing everything clean except the past. The courthouse smelled of paper-old coffee and polished wood, the scent of other people's endings. It was early January, cold enough that my breath still showed when I stepped inside. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Alan, his tie perfectly straight, his notes stacked in tidy rows. My own hands rested still on the table palms flat, as though holding myself steady. Across the aisle sat my father, Richard Warren, once the man whose lectures drew crowds, whose voice filled classrooms, now slumped in a gray suit that hung too loose on him. His hair had turned nearly white in a matter of months. The light caught the lines on his face, deeper now, carved by shame rather than time. He didn't look up. Claire wasn't there. She'd left the state in November, according to the subpoena that came back undeliverable. I wasn't surprised. People like her always disappear before the dust settles. The courtroom buzzed quietly with the murmurs of reporters, the rustle of legal pads. The judge entered and the room stilled. Alan leaned toward me, whispering, "Breathe." I did, slowly, deliberately. When the judge began reading the verdict, I watched my father instead of listening to the words. I'd heard them already in my head 100 times. Still, when the gavel came down, the sound felt final, like a door closing. "The Lakeview property remains under the legal ownership of Ms. Emily Warren," the judge said. "The accused, Mr. Richard Warren, is found guilty of document forgery and misrepresentation under Washington state law. Sentencing will be deferred pending restitution." Alan gave a small nod, his version of victory. My father exhaled, one long, broken sound that filled the quiet like a confession. He looked smaller somehow, the kind of small that comes from having nowhere left to stand. The bailiff dismissed the room. People began to rise, shuffle, whisper. Alan stood and started gathering the paperwork, but I stayed seated for a moment longer. The sunlight through the tall window fell across the table, bright and cold. I stared at the grain in the wood, tracing it with my eyes. "Emily," his voice came from behind me, hesitant, rough. I turned. My father stood a few feet away, the space between us suddenly feeling much larger than the courtroom itself. His hands trembled at his sides. "I'm sorry," he said. I nodded. "I know." He hesitated, searching my face for something that wasn't there anymore. "You'll hate me forever, won't you?" I thought about that. The question felt heavy, but not complicated. "No," I said softly, "but I'll never let you near what I love again." He blinked, his lips parting as if to respond, but he didn't. The silence between us was clean this time, not tense, not angry, just done. We stood there for a moment looking at each other like strangers who almost remembered who they used to be. His eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. Maybe he didn't have tears left. Alan came back, his voice low but firm. "Emily, we should go." I nodded again, not taking my eyes off my father until I finally turned away. As we walked out into the hallway, I felt something loosen inside me. Not relief exactly, but release. Forgiveness isn't erasing the wound. It's walking away before it festers. Outside, the air bit at my cheeks. Cameras clicked somewhere in the distance, flashes bouncing off the marble steps. But I didn't stop. Alan spoke quietly beside me about paperwork, follow-ups, restitution hearings. But his words faded behind the sound of my boots against the stone. Back in Seattle that evening, I sat in my office as the rain tapped against the window. The city lights reflected off the glass like 1,000 small fires. My phone buzzed once. A new email notification. The subject line read, "I thought he'd leave her for me." The sender was Claire. For a long moment I didn't open it. Then curiosity, old tired curiosity, got the better of me. The message was short. "I thought he'd leave her for me." I guess liars always overpromise. No greeting, no apology. Just resignation dressed as self-awareness. I read it once, twice, then pressed delete. The inbox returned to silence. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, echoing across the skyline. I turned off the desk lamp and leaned back in my chair, letting the darkness settle. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad either. I was something quieter. Peaceful, maybe, or just empty in a way that didn't hurt anymore. Down by the lake, somewhere between reflection and shadow, the version of me who used to crave answers had finally gone still. And in that stillness, I realized that endings don't always arrive with noise. Sometimes they just sit beside you in the quiet, waiting to be noticed, until you finally whisper back, "Enough." By March, the ice on the lake had cracked open, and the sound of water returned to Lakeview. The trees were still bare, but the air carried a different kind of cold, the kind that hinted at warmth waiting its turn. I drove the long road back to the house, my old SUV rattling over the gravel. The last time I'd been here, it had felt like a crime scene. Now it just looked like a place waiting to breathe again. When I stepped inside, the house smelled like time. Dust and lavender, faint traces of winter air. I walked straight to the windows and opened them one by one. The wind swept through the rooms, tugging at the curtains, stirring the silence. The scent changed almost immediately lighter, cleaner. It wasn't the house that needed cleansing. It was me. I rolled up my sleeves and started where the worst ghosts live. The bathroom. The tub gleamed faintly under the morning light, but I could still see the memory of steam of shadows of that day burned into its surface. I pulled the towels from the rack, folded them into a bag, and set them by the door. New ones, fresh, white, soft, untainted, waited in the back seat of my car. I opened a can of paint and dipped the brush in. The first stroke of white covered the faint blue that once matched the lake. Each line erased another memory. The lavender scent was still there, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It mingled with the smell of paint and fresh air. Clean, simple. When I finished, I stood back and looked at it. The same room, but not the same story. By afternoon, I heard the sound of tires on gravel. A familiar rhythm. I stepped outside, and there she was, my mother standing beside her car, holding a small basket of sandwiches and 2 paintbrushes. "I figured you could use a hand," she said. Her smile was soft but sure. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed seeing her that way. Steady, not fragile. Always, I said, taking one of the brushes. We worked quietly side by side. The rhythmic scrape of bristles filled the air between us. Every so often she'd hum, a tune I didn't recognize, something calm and wordless. The afternoon light shifted slowly from silver to gold, touching the walls as we painted. When we stopped to eat, we sat on the porch steps, sandwiches in hand. The lake was still glassy. My reflection stared back, but this time, it didn't look like a stranger's. "You've done a lot of work," she said, glancing at the newly painted trim through the window. "It feels good," I said, like taking a deep breath for the first time. She nodded. "Sometimes, the only way to heal a place is to touch it again." When the sun began to dip, we went back inside. The house looked different now, brighter somehow, though the lamps were still off. On the mantel above the fireplace, I'd set out a framed photo I'd found in a box earlier that morning. My grandparents standing in front of the house when it was first built. My grandfather's arm around my grandmother. Both of them smiling at the camera, like they already knew it would become home to generations. "Help me hang it," I asked. My mother smiled faintly and nodded. Together, we centered it above the fireplace, straightened it, and stepped back. "They'd be proud," she whispered. "Maybe," I said. "But I think they'd just be glad we finally stopped fighting the ghosts." She turned to me then, the firelight catching her face. "You didn't just survive Emily," she said, her voice soft but certain. "You freed us." For a second I couldn't speak. I just looked at her, this woman who had been both victim and fighter, fragile and fierce. "Maybe we freed each other," I said. She reached out, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and touched my cheek lightly. The warmth of her hand lingered. "You remind me of your grandmother," she said. She had that same quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. We sat together as the last of the daylight turned to gold. The lake outside shimmered like molten glass, reflecting everything softly. For the first time in months, the water didn't mirror pain, it mirrored peace. I stood by the window as the air cooled, watching the ripples fade into stillness. Behind me, my mother washed the brushes, humming that same tune. There were no more voices in the walls, no more memories pressing down from above, just the soft sound of water and light. And for the first time I realized that peace doesn't arrive suddenly. It grows quietly, the way morning light fills a room after a long night. The morning light in Seattle came soft and slow, the kind that made everything look gentler than it really was. I sat at my desk with the microphone in front of me, the little red recording light glowing steady. My laptop screen reflected my face back at me, older, calmer, more honest somehow. Today's story. I began my voice clear but quiet. Isn't about architecture. It's about rebuilding. The words came easier than I expected. I wasn't reading from notes, not really. I was speaking from memory, from the places inside me that had been rebuilt alongside the house. This isn't about design or structure, I said. It's about a home that was broken, and what it took to make it whole again. Sometimes walls don't just hold us. They hold everything we try to forget, and sometimes the only way to move forward is to strip them bare and start fresh. I glanced at the window beside my desk. The Seattle skyline was pale under a thin winter sun. The city hummed faintly outside. Car engines' footsteps, the low rhythm of life continuing. I took a breath and continued. I once owned a house that had every reason to fall apart. It was quiet in the way grief is quiet, heavy, still. But I learned something inside those walls, that even the strongest foundations can crack if you stop paying attention. And yet sometimes even broken things can be rebuilt stronger than before. My throat tightened, but I didn't stop. Some homes hold love, some hold lies. The lucky ones hold lessons. For a moment, I let the silence hang. The microphone caught my breath, the faint creak of my chair. Then I smiled, small and real. This is for anyone who's ever walked into a storm and come out standing. Because rebuilding isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's about deciding what's worth keeping when the dust settles. When I stopped the recording, the silence in the apartment didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I leaned back and let out a long exhale. The audio file blinked on the screen, saved automatically. Homes That Remember. Episode 27. Later that week, I drove back to Lakeview. The snow had melted, leaving behind patches of green and the smell of thawed earth. The road curved along the water, and the house appeared between the trees like something rediscovered, not haunted. Inside, the air was light. I'd left the windows cracked, and the scent of pine and paint mixed with the faintest trace of spring. On the kitchen counter sat a vase of yellow lilies, fresh and bright against the white walls. I rearranged them, turning the stems just enough to catch the sunlight from the window. In the reflection of the glass, I saw myself, not the woman who once walked into this house trembling, but someone whole, someone at peace. Outside, my mother sat on the deck wrapped in a wool shawl reading a book. She looked up when she saw me, smiled, and went back to her page. The world felt still, not silent, just balanced. I stepped outside the boards creaking under my feet. The lake shimmered gold under the afternoon sun. For a moment I stood there without moving, without thinking, just breathing. This time I whispered more to the water than to myself. It's mine again. The breeze carried my words across the surface, rippling them into the light. Margaret looked up from her book. What was that? Nothing, I said, softly smiling. Just talking to the lake, she chuckled. You always did. We stayed out there until the sun began to dip, the sky fading into amber. The sound of birds echoed through the trees, distant and gentle. The house behind us glowed in the last light. New paint, new air, new meaning. Later, when my mother went inside to make tea, I lingered a little longer by the railing, tracing the edge of the wood with my fingers. The reflection of the sky danced across the water, calm and infinite. Betrayal didn't define me. Survival did. And maybe in the end, peace isn't the absence of chaos. It's knowing how to stand still in the middle of it. The lake shimmered once more like it agreed. When I got back to Seattle that night, I uploaded the podcast episode. Within hours, the comments began trickling in, people sharing stories of rebuilding of loss and strength of quiet triumphs. I read each one smiling at how many strangers had found themselves inside my words. If you've ever faced your own storm, remember, still waters don't mean silence. They mean strength. And sometimes that strength is the story worth telling.